the unbreakable claim, the arrival of the Kryn Dominion. The Kryn Dominion arrived on a Tuesday morning, and with them came the end of everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. Their fleet materialized above Earth's atmosphere like a dark constellation, hundreds of ships that blotted out the sun across 3 continents. They were massive, each vessel the size of a small city, their hulls covered in a strange crystalline armor that seemed to shift between states of matter, neither fully solid nor entirely energy. The message they broadcast was simple and cold. It played simultaneously on every communication device across the planet, translated perfectly into every human language, through technology we couldn't begin to comprehend. The voice that spoke carried no emotion, no inflection, just absolute certainty. We are the Kryn Dominion. For 12,000 cycles we have expanded across this galaxy. We have encountered 473 sentient species. All have tested our defenses. All have failed. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your technology cannot match us. Your resistance is futile. You have 1 planetary rotation to surrender your world. Compliance will result in your integration. Defiance will result in your extinction. The transmission ended and chaos erupted across the globe. Governments scrambled. Military forces mobilized. Scientists worked frantically to analyze the alien ships. And in every major city, people looked up at the sky and felt something humanity hadn't truly experienced in centuries. Genuine, existential terror. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation room of the International Defense Coalition headquarters in Geneva, watching the feeds from satellites and ground stations. She was a theoretical physicist who had spent 20 years studying exotic matter and dimensional mechanics. Her work had been considered fringe science by most of her colleagues, interesting but impractical. Now, as she watched the Kryn ships hovering impossibly in Earth's orbit, defying every law of physics she thought she understood, her hands trembled. "They're not bluffing," she whispered to nobody in particular. "That armor, it's phasing between dimensions. Conventional weapons would pass right through it." Beside her, Commander James Rutherford of the United Earth Defense Force nodded grimly. He was a career soldier, 53 years old, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many conflicts. But nothing in his 30 years of military service had prepared him for this. "We've already tried," he said quietly. 3 hours ago, the Chinese launched a tactical nuclear strike at the smallest ship in their fleet. The missile passed through the hull like it wasn't even there, detonated in the upper atmosphere. Didn't even scratch the paint. Earth's desperate hour. The Kryn didn't wait the full 24 hours. 18 hours after their initial message, they demonstrated exactly what defiance would cost. The city of Mumbai was their chosen example. No warning, no second chance. Just a single beam of violet light that descended from the largest Kryn vessel and touched the Earth. When the light faded 3 seconds later, Mumbai was gone. Not destroyed, not ruined, simply gone. Where 15 million people had lived and worked and loved, there was now a perfectly smooth crater 5 kilometers across. Its surface fused into black glass that reflected the horrified faces of rescue workers who arrived to find absolutely nothing to rescue. The world watched in horror. Every news station, every social media feed, every screen showed the same impossible absence. The Kryn had erased an entire city as casually as a human might erase a word from a page. The second message came immediately after. "This is the cost of delay. You now have 6 hours. Surrender, or we will demonstrate again." In Geneva, the emergency session of the Global Defense Council descended into pandemonium. Representatives shouted, some demanding immediate surrender, others calling for a suicidal counterattack, and a few simply weeping at the sheer magnitude of loss and helplessness. Sarah Chen sat at the back of the room, her mind racing through equations and theories, searching desperately for something, anything that could help. The Kryn armor was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, but it had to have a weakness. Everything had a weakness. The laws of physics demanded it. Commander Rutherford found her 3 hours into the session, pulling her aside into a quiet corridor. His face was grim but determined. "Dr. Chen, I need you to tell me honestly. Is there any way we can fight these things? Any theoretical possibility, no matter how remote?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment, weighing her response. She could tell him the truth that any rational scientist would give. That the Kryn were so far beyond humanity's technological capability that resistance was suicide. Or she could tell him what the irrational, angry, grieving part of her heart was screaming. "There might be," she said slowly. But it would require resources we don't have, time we definitely don't have, and a willingness to try something that has never been tested and could potentially destroy the planet as effectively as the Kryn would. Rutherford's expression didn't change. Tell me everything. The Council of Last Hope, they called it the Omega Session, and it took place in a reinforced bunker 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps. 73 people attended, the world's top physicists, engineers, weapons designers, and military strategists. They had 4 hours before the Kryn deadline expired. Sarah stood at the front of the room, a holographic display showing her radical proposal. Her voice was steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. The Kryn armor phases between our dimension and at least 2 others, she explained. That's why conventional weapons don't work. The armor literally isn't in our reality when the attack hits, but that phasing has to be controlled, which means there has to be a frequency, a pattern to it. A Japanese physicist named Dr. Kenji Yamamoto raised his hand. Even if we could detect that frequency, how does that help us? We can't phase our weapons to match. No, Sarah agreed, but we can do something better. We can disrupt it. She brought up another display, this one showing a weapon design that made several attendees gasp. It looked like nothing humanity had ever built. A fusion of particle accelerator, quantum computer, and something that resembled a tuning fork more than a gun. I call it a resonance disruptor, Sarah continued. It doesn't fire a projectile. It fires a wave of quantum interference tuned specifically to destabilize dimensional phasing. If we can hit a Kryn ship with this, it would force their armor to collapse into a single dimension for approximately 0.3 seconds. 0.3 seconds? Someone asked skeptically. That's not enough time to do any damage. Commander Rutherford stepped forward. It is if we're ready for it. We coordinate the resonance disruptor with conventional weapons. The disruptor fires, the armor solidifies, and we have 1/3 of a second to hit them with everything we've got. The room erupted in questions and objections. The technology required didn't exist. The power needs were astronomical. The timing would have to be perfect. Any miscalculation could be catastrophic. Dr. Yamamoto stood, silencing the room. How many of these weapons would we need to take down their entire fleet? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Based on their fleet composition and assuming each disruptor only works once before burning out, we would need exactly 10. The Forge Initiative. The world's governments made their decision in the last hour before the deadline. They would pretend to surrender while secretly building the 10 resonance disruptors. It was a desperate gamble that required lying to an enemy who could read electromagnetic communications and likely had sensors that could detect any large-scale construction project. But humanity had one advantage the Kryn didn't expect. We were very good at hiding things underground. 10 teams were assembled, each at a different location across the globe. Each team had the same resources, the same plans, and the same impossible deadline. They had to build weapons based on theoretical physics that had never been tested, using materials that barely existed, in facilities that had to remain completely hidden from alien sensors capable of detecting a mobile phone from orbit. Sarah led Team 1 in a converted mine shaft beneath the Nevada desert. She worked alongside 52 of the brightest minds she had ever encountered, people who had dropped everything and risked everything because the alternative was extinction. They worked in shifts that lasted until people collapsed from exhaustion. They scavenged parts from particle accelerators, experimental reactors, and classified military projects. They had no idea if any of it would work, but they built anyway because what else could they do? Commander Rutherford coordinated the global effort from a mobile command center that moved every 6 hours to avoid detection. He watched the Kryn fleet hovering above, watched as the aliens began their integration process, setting up massive structures in the ruins of Mumbai, and 3 other locations they had chosen as administrative centers. The Kryn believed humanity had surrendered. They believed we were broken, beaten, accepting our place as subjects of their empire. They didn't understand that surrender and submission were not the same thing, and that humans were at their most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. 47 days after the Kryn arrival, the first resonance disruptor was complete. Sarah stood in front of it, this massive cylindrical device that hummed with barely contained power, and felt tears streaming down her face. It was beautiful and terrible, a weapon built not from a desire for conquest but from a desperate need to survive. Dr. Chen, Rutherford's voice crackled over her earpiece. We need you to run the final tests. Teams 3 and 7 are ready as well. If your calculations are correct, we can begin the operation within 72 hours. Sarah wiped her eyes and nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Commander, there's something you need to know. These weapons, they're drawing power from quantum vacuum fluctuations. The math works, but there's a non-zero chance that firing one could create a cascading reaction. We could accidentally tear a hole in space-time. There was a long silence before Rutherford responded. What are the odds? 0.003% per firing. With 10 weapons, cumulative risk is approximately 0.03%. Another pause. Those are better odds than we have against the Kryn. Yes, sir. They are. First blood, they chose their target carefully. A medium-sized Kryn vessel positioned over what used to be Lagos. It was part of a supply chain the aliens had established, relatively isolated from the main fleet, and its destruction would disrupt Kryn operations without immediately triggering a full military response. The operation was named Prometheus, and it required coordination across 3 continents. Team 1 would fire the first resonance disruptor from Nevada. The moment the Kryn armor solidified, a coordinated strike of conventional weapons would hit from every angle. Missiles from submarines in the Atlantic, railgun fire from hidden installations in North Africa, and a kinetic bombardment from a satellite the Kryn had dismissed as space debris. Sarah stood at the control panel of the disruptor, her hands hovering over the activation sequence. Around her, the team was silent, every eye fixed on the countdown clock. 60 seconds, 45, 30. All strike teams report ready, Rutherford's voice announced. Dr. Chen, you are authorized to fire at your discretion. Sarah took a deep breath and began the sequence. The disruptor powered up with a sound like reality tearing, a deep thrumming that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the bones. Energy readings spiked into ranges that should have been impossible, and for a terrifying moment, Sarah thought they had made a catastrophic mistake. Then she pressed the final button, and the disruptor fired. The beam was invisible to human eyes, a pulse of quantum interference that traveled at the speed of light and struck the Kryn vessel exactly where Sarah's calculations had predicted. For 0.3 seconds, the alien ship's dimensional armor collapsed, forcing it fully into Earth's reality. In that instant, humanity struck with everything we had. 12 cruise missiles hit the ship's hull simultaneously, railgun rounds traveling at 20,000 meters per second, punched through armor that had never known damage. The kinetic bombardment from orbit delivered the force of a small nuclear explosion without the radiation, and the Kryn vessel, for the first time in its species' 12,000-year history of conquest, felt pain. The ship's crystalline hull cracked. Atmosphere vented into space. Internal explosions rippled through its structure as systems overloaded and failed. And then, in a final catastrophic failure, the vessel's power core breached. The explosion lit up the night sky across half the planet. When it faded, there was nothing left but debris and the shocked silence of 2 civilizations that had just learned something new about each other. The Kryn learned that humanity could hurt them, and humanity learned that we were not as helpless as we thought. The Kryn's response. The response came swiftly and with terrifying fury. The entire Kryn fleet mobilized within hours, their vessels descending from high orbit to hunting altitude. They abandoned all pretense of peaceful integration and reverted to what they truly were, a military empire built on conquest and intimidation. Their message was brief and filled with cold rage. You have made your choice. No mercy will be given. No survivors will remain. The Kryn began a systematic bombardment of every major population center on Earth. But this time, humanity was not defenseless. This time we had proven that the supposedly unbreakable could be broken, and we had 9 more weapons that could do it again. Sarah watched the global tactical display from the Nevada bunker, her heart pounding as Kryn vessels closed in on civilian populations. She could see teams 2 through 10 scattered across the world, each preparing their resonance disruptors, each ready to strike back. Commander Rutherford's voice came through the command channel, steady and determined. All teams, this is Prometheus Command. The Kryn want a war. Let's show them what happens when humanity decides to fight back. Prepare to engage on my mark. Sarah placed her hand on the disruptor's control panel, feeling the weapon hum beneath her palm. Around her, her team took their positions, fear and determination mingling in their eyes. They had built 10 weapons to break the unbreakable. The Kryn had claimed no gun could harm them, Humanity was about to prove them catastrophically wrong. All teams. Rutherford's voice rang out across the secure channels, reaching every bunker, every hidden facility, every desperate group of humans who had refused to surrender. Fire at will, and the war truly began. The decision was made. Operation Final Dawn would commence in 24 hours, giving the remaining teams time to prepare and coordinate. It would be humanity's last throw of the dice, 5 desperate strikes against an empire that had never known defeat. But the Kryn had one more surprise waiting. The cost of war, 18 hours before Operation Final Dawn was scheduled to begin. The Kryn found Team 7. Dr. Ahmed Hassan and his team had been operating from a converted salt mine beneath the Sahara Desert, and they had been meticulous about hiding their energy signatures and maintaining communication security. But the Kryn had learned to look for absence rather than presence, to identify places where there was too much nothing, where the background radiation was too clean. The assault came without warning. Kryn ground forces, deployed for the first time in the war, descended on the Algerian desert in drop pods that hit the sand like meteors. They were shock troopers, each one a 3-meter-tall killing machine bred specifically for close combat, with armor that could shrug off small arms fire and weapons that could melt through steel. Dr. Hassan's team had 12 security personnel. They lasted 4 minutes. Commander Rutherford watched the satellite feed in horror as the Kryn forces breached the facility, moving through corridors with ruthless efficiency. He could see the disruptor in the main chamber, could see Dr. Hassan standing in front of it, his hands moving across the control panel. "He's arming it," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. "He's going to fire it right there in the bunker." "The blast will kill everyone inside," Rutherford said, "including him." "I know." They watched as Dr. Hassan activated the weapon at point-blank range. The disruptor fired, not at a distant target but at the Kryn forces inside the facility itself. The quantum interference wave tore through the underground complex, and every Kryn soldier within range found their own dimensional phase technology suddenly, catastrophically destabilized. The aliens simply came apart, their bodies unable to maintain cohesion as the technology integrated into their biology failed. They died instantly, painlessly, but they died. And so did Dr. Hassan and everyone else in the facility, killed by the radiation pulse and energy feedback from the weapon's discharge. But the disruptor survived. Damaged, possibly unusable, but intact. "Get me a recovery team," Rutherford ordered, his voice tight with grief and anger. "If there's any chance that weapon can still fire, we need it." The recovery took 16 hours. By the time they extracted the disruptor from the ruined facility, they had only 8 hours until Operation Final Dawn. The weapon was damaged, its focusing array cracked, and its power systems unstable. But Sarah's team thought they could make it work one more time. "It won't be as accurate," she told Rutherford as technicians worked frantically to repair the disruptor. "And there's maybe a 50-50 chance it explodes when we try to fire it. But it will fire. Then we use it," Rutherford said without hesitation. Dr. Hassan didn't die to leave us a paperweight. Across the world, the other 4 teams prepared for their final strikes. In Australia, beneath Uluru, Dr. Jennifer Clark and her team ran final checks on Weapon 6. In Siberia, in a bunker that had once housed Soviet nuclear missiles, Dr. Dmitry Volkov prepared Weapon 8. In Peru, high in the Andes, Weapon 9 hummed with ready power. And in Nevada, Sarah stood before the original disruptor, the weapon that had started it all, preparing to fire it one last time. They had 5 weapons. The Kryn had 73 ships remaining in their fleet. The math was impossible, the odds insurmountable. But humanity had never been very good at accepting impossible odds. Weapon 6 through 9 operation, Final Dawn, began at sunrise over the Pacific Ocean, timed so that the light of a new day would witness either humanity's greatest victory or its final defeat. Weapon 6 fired first, its beam lancing up from beneath Uluru to strike a Kryn dreadnought that had been systematically destroying Australia's coastal defenses. The ship's armor collapsed, and a coordinated strike from every remaining Australian military asset turned the alien vessel into a fireball that lit up the morning sky. 6 down. 67 to go. Weapon 8 fired from Siberia 3 seconds later, catching a Kryn carrier that had been deploying ground forces across Eastern Europe. The disruption wave hit perfectly, and Russian hypersonic missiles that had been held in reserve for 70 years finally found a target worthy of their devastating power. The carrier broke apart in midair, its pieces scattering across the taiga. 7 down, 66 remaining. But the Kryn were ready now. They had seen the pattern, understood the coordination. Their fleet began evasive maneuvers, ships scattering across the globe to make targeting harder. Some descended into low atmosphere where their own sensors were less effective, but where ground-based weapons would have trouble tracking them. Others climbed to high orbit, putting distance between themselves and the planet's surface. Weapon 9 fired from the Andes, and for the first time a disruptor missed its target. The beam passed through empty space where a Kryn battleship had been milliseconds before, the ship having moved with reflexes faster than human weapons could compensate for. The coordinated strike that should have destroyed the vessel hit nothing but air. "They're learning our timing," Sarah said as she watched the failure unfold on her displays. "They're predicting when we'll fire and moving just before the beam arrives." "Then we change the timing," Rutherford replied. "All remaining weapons fire at will. No coordination, no patterns. Make them guess." Weapon 7, Dr. Hassan's repaired disruptor now operated by a fresh team, fired from a mobile platform in the Atlantic Ocean. The weapon had been loaded onto a submarine and repositioned every hour since its recovery, making it impossible for the Kryn to predict where the next strike would come from. The beam emerged from beneath the waves and struck a Kryn science vessel that had been analyzing the wreckage of previous kills, trying to understand the disruption technology. The ship solidified, and torpedo spreads from 6 different submarines converged on it from every direction. The science vessel didn't have military-grade shields or armor. It died quickly, taking with it decades of Kryn research and their best hope of developing a counter to the human weapons. 8 down. 65 ships, still impossibly outnumbered but no longer hopeless. Weapon 6 managed a second shot before its systems overloaded, catching another Kryn vessel by surprise as it descended to bombard New Delhi. The disruption worked, but the coordinated strike failed. The missiles that should have destroyed the ship were intercepted by Kryn point defense systems that had been upgraded after analyzing previous attacks. The alien vessel survived, damaged but functional, and retreated to high orbit trailing atmosphere and debris. It was a reminder that adaptation worked both ways. The Kryn were learning just as humanity was, and they had thousands of years of warfare experience to draw upon. The 10th weapon, 3 weapons remained: Nevada, Peru, and the submarine-mounted disruptor, against 64 Kryn ships that were now actively hunting for the weapon emplacements, using every sensor and scanning technology at their disposal. The Kryn found the Peruvian facility first, detecting the massive energy signature as the weapon powered up for another shot. They didn't send ground troops this time. They simply fired an orbital bombardment lance, a beam of concentrated energy that could tunnel through a kilometer of solid rock in seconds. The mountain exploded. The facility, the weapon, and the 73 people inside were vaporized instantly. Weapon 9 was gone, and with it went 1/3 of humanity's remaining firepower. 2 weapons, Sarah said quietly, staring at the tactical display. 2 weapons against 64 ships. "Commander, even if both shots are perfect, we can't win this." Rutherford looked at the display for a long moment, his face unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost peaceful. "Dr. Chen, in your original calculations, what would happen if we overcharged a disruptor? If we fed it more power than it was designed to handle?" Sarah felt cold understanding wash over her. The increased power would expand the disruption field. Instead of affecting a single ship, it could potentially destabilize every Kryn vessel within several hundred kilometers. Would it work? Maybe. Probably. But the weapon would definitely destroy itself in the process, and anyone within the blast radius would be exposed to lethal levels of quantum radiation. How large a radius? Sarah ran the calculations quickly. At maximum overcharge, approximately 200 kilometers. Everything in that circle dies, Kryn and human alike. Rutherford nodded slowly. The submarine can fire from safe distance. But if we overcharge the Nevada disruptor, if we use it as a strategic weapon rather than a tactical one, we could take out 1/3 of their remaining fleet in a single shot, Sarah finished. But everyone in this facility would die. Everyone in Nevada, possibly parts of California and Arizona too. "The area has already been evacuated," Rutherford said quietly. When the Kryn invasion began, we moved every civilian we could to underground shelters or dispersed them into rural areas. There are still people above us, yes, but far fewer than there would have been. Sarah looked at her team, at the 52 brilliant minds who had worked alongside her for weeks, who had sacrificed everything to build the weapon that might save humanity. They looked back at her with understanding in their eyes. They had always known it might come to this. We'd need to lure a large concentration of Kryn ships into range, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. They're not stupid. They won't cluster unless they have a reason. They'll cluster if they think they've found our last weapon, Rutherford replied. If they think they're about to win. The plan came together quickly. The submarine would fire its disruptor at a target in the Atlantic, drawing Kryn attention and making them believe it was humanity's last desperate strike. While the aliens focused on hunting the submarine, the Nevada facility would power up its weapon to maximum overcharge, far beyond anything it was designed to handle. The Kryn would detect the energy signature. They would recognize it as the source of the original disruption weapons, and they would send everything they had to destroy it, to eliminate the threat once and for all. And then Sarah would fire, and 43 Kryn ships would discover too late that sometimes the prey has teeth sharp enough to kill the hunter. Aftermath and victory. The submarine fired first, its disruptor striking a Kryn patrol ship near the Azores. The ship died as expected, and the Kryn fleet reacted exactly as predicted. 20 ships converged on the submarine's location, determined to destroy the weapon before it could fire again. The submarine dove deep and ran silent, its crew knowing they were leading humanity's enemies away from the real threat. They would survive the next few hours or they wouldn't, but either way they had done their duty. In Nevada, Sarah initiated the overcharge sequence. Warning klaxons blared as power levels climbed into the red, far beyond safety margins, far beyond anything the disruptor was designed to handle. The weapon began to scream, a sound like metal tearing and reality bending as quantum energy built up in chambers that were never meant to contain such forces. The Kryn detected it immediately. 43 ships broke off from their pursuit of the submarine and redirected toward Nevada, moving at maximum speed. They knew what was coming. They knew they had to destroy the facility before it could fire. They were 2 minutes too slow. Sarah watched the Kryn fleet converge on the tactical display, watched as ship after ship entered the blast radius. Her hand hovered over the firing control, waiting for the perfect moment when the maximum number of enemy vessels would be in range. Commander Rutherford stood beside her, having refused to evacuate with the non-essential personnel. If Sarah was going to die here, she wouldn't die alone. Dr. Chen, he said quietly, it's been an honor. Sarah smiled despite the tears running down her face. The honor was mine, Commander. She pressed the button. The overcharged disruptor fired, and for an instant the laws of physics in a 200-kilometer radius simply stopped working. The disruption wave expanded at the speed of light, catching every Kryn vessel within range. Their dimensional armor collapsed, their phase technology failed, and for the first time in their 12,000-year history, the Kryn fleet found itself completely vulnerable. But they had no time to process this revelation because in the same instant, the disruptor detonated. The explosion was visible from space, a white-hot sphere of quantum fire that expanded and then collapsed, leaving nothing but fused glass and silence. 43 Kryn ships fell from the sky, their armor gone, their systems fried by the electromagnetic pulse. They crashed across Nevada, Arizona, and California, massive alien hulks that would become monuments to the cost of underestimating humanity. The submarine, still hiding in the Atlantic depths, fired its disruptor at the remaining Kryn ships that were now scattered, confused, and leaderless. Over the next 6 hours, human forces across the globe hunted down the survivors, coordinating attacks on vessels that no longer had the protection of their dimensional armor or the benefit of their command structure. By the time the sun rose the next day, the Kryn invasion force was destroyed. A few ships escaped into deep space, fleeing back to their empire with news of their impossible defeat. But Earth's orbit was clear, and humanity had survived. Humanity's new place, the cost had been terrible. 3 billion people dead, dozens of cities destroyed, entire regions rendered uninhabitable by the fighting. The Nevada facility was a crater. Dr. Sarah Chen and Commander James Rutherford and 50 others were gone. their sacrifice memorialized in the glass that had once been the desert above them. But humanity had survived. More than that, humanity had won. The recovered Kryn technology revolutionized human science within a year. The dimensional armor, the FTL drives, the energy systems, all of it was reverse engineered and improved upon. Humanity didn't just copy Kryn technology. We made it better, faster, more efficient, because that's what humans do. We adapt. We innovate. We improve. 10 years after the invasion, human ships ventured beyond the solar system for the first time. We found other species, other civilizations, and we found that word of Earth's victory had spread. The species that had defeated the unbreakable Kryn had become legend. A cautionary tale told across 100 worlds about what happens when you underestimate a determined enemy. The galaxy learned what the Kryn had learned too late. That humanity's greatest weapon wasn't our technology or our innovation. It was our refusal to surrender, our inability to accept defeat, our stubborn, irrational, beautiful insistence that no matter how impossible the odds, we would find a way to survive. The galaxy learned what the Kryn had learned too late, that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't our technology or our innovation. It was our refusal to surrender, our inability to accept defeat, our stubborn, irrational, beautiful insistence that no matter how impossible the odds, we would find a way to survive. The Kryn had claimed they were unbreakable, that no weapon could harm them, that resistance was futile. They had conquered 473 species and ruled 12,000 years without defeat, and then they met humanity, and we built 10 weapons. That proved them wrong. The memorial at the Nevada crater bears a simple inscription, words that have become humanity's motto as we spread across the stars. They said it couldn't be done. We did it anyway.